Hello everyone, this is another whiteboard session. It's slightly dark still, I'm still working on my lighting, but I'll get that resolved here soon. Until then, hopefully you still find the information very useful and something you can employ either because you're a beginner, which is what this is mainly focused on, or because it's relevant to whatever you do. So in this case today I wanted to talk about email, at least how email actually is transited and the parts of it that we really care about as threat intelligence, cyber threat intelligence, what's important in that part, because there's many cool things you could talk about when it comes to email, but really we want to focus on the elements at this point that are very practical and useful for someone who's beginning in the field, which is what this whiteboard series is kind of focused on. In this case, I want to talk about what happens when you send an email and a few things that we care about on the threat intelligence side. So let me start here. We're going to continue the tale of Isolde and Tristan. In fact, it's going to be Isolde who's going to be sending an email. And before I get into all that, I do need to talk about just a few terms that you will keep in mind as we're doing this. And the first one I want to talk about, you'll hear that squeak there, that's my marker, is MUA, which I want you to think of as the mail user agent. Now in this case, it's probably simpler to go, this is my Thunderbird, this is my Outlook, whatever, it's my client that I use to send email. And that's important to keep in mind. So when we say MUA, really we're saying the client. And we mean specifically every time that that's the client. The client will be both the starting point and the end point for email. Email is meant to go from someone to another someone, so it will go from their client to another person's client. So MUA is a really important one to remember. The second one that I want you to remember that's relevant is the MTA. Now, I frequently mess up the T, but it is properly transfer. Let's see if I can spell here. And it's not authority, which I commonly say, so if I say that during this video, please know that I mean agent. So MTA stands for Mail Transit Agent. And every email will have at least one mail transfer agent that's part of this whole process. It will also have an MX, which is basically shorthand for a mail exchange. There we go. Hopefully this is legible. If it's not, it's mail exchange. And kind of the last term that I want you to keep in mind, at least for the moment, is SMTP. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this term. Its breakdown, it stands for Simple Mail, there's that word transfer again, transfer, and then of course the P stands for protocol. Now when we say SMTP, we're kind of using it in more than one context. The first context is we mean this as the protocol that's involved in sending an email. We're using SMTP protocol. We could also make this a reference to a port, but I'll skip that right now. We're not talking about ports. But it also means the server. So SMTP server, we often reference it as SMTP. And when we say the SMTP server, we're specifically talking about a mail transfer agent. Because the whole job of each one of these is, this is the client where you write, construct, and set up your email. It gets handed off to a mail transfer agent whose sole job is to read who you're trying to send it to, figure out how to route that, and then actually route the particular email. Now, these are relatively synonymous, but not 100%. There's my little stacked equals. Not every mail exchange fully acts as a mail transfer agent, just like not every mail transfer agent acts fully like a mail exchange. They have slightly different things that they do, but for our purposes today, we're going to consider them pretty much synonyms. Now, I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to start drawing some really bad pictures, because that's what I'm good at, is really bad pictures. Now, Isolde wants to send a love letter to her lover, Tristan, who's in Wales. Now, Isolde pops open her Thunderbird client, which is a mail user agent, and she writes her love letter. She goes to Tristan@wales.org and retails her tales of love. Writes a poem, tells him something fun. Here we're going to put her poem on here, her lover's poem. And she has put in email, because that's definitely what you need to put in email, is a love letter. And she's in her mail user agent, aka her Thunderbolt client, and she is going to send that to an SMTP server. So I'm going to number these. Number 1, she writes the email. Now at this point it could be HTML, it could be text, could be a mix, doesn't matter. She could attach pictures, all that's there inside the email. It gets packaged up and it gets sent to an SMTP server. Now the SMTP server's job is to read the header, basically, this is step 2, and understand where it's trying to go. It's going to read the Tristan@wales.org and go, I don't know where wales.org is, but I know who to ask. And so it's going to send a query to DNS and say, where is wales.org? Because she's trying to send things to Tristan@wales.org. And this DNS server will start with the first DNS server that this SMTP server knows, and it will then chain. Now, I'm not going to repeat all the DNS pieces, but in the basics of DNS, there is a authoritative and non-authoritative server. If the first server this SMTP server reaches out to is not authoritative, it will continue to ask until it gets an authoritative answer, an answer that is correct. And when it gets that answer, it will get sent back. So step 3 is the DNS side of the house. Step 1 is a repeat. Isolde writes the email, she sends her love letter, and step 2, the SMTP server gets it and says, I don't know who this is, let me go ask. So step 3, the DNS system kicks in, it asks several DNS servers, finally gets an answer back like, oh, I know where wales.org is, and so it sends it back to the SMTP server as part of step 4. Now the SMTP server can act like a mail exchange at this point, because now it knows where to route the email. So then it takes this beautiful email that has been written, and then it sends it to the wales.org mail exchange, which may also be an SMTP server. Actually, it will be an SMTP server in most cases. Now, on the way, just like with the rest of the domain name system, it may not be a single trip. It may be really far away geographically or logically, and so it's going to hand off. And there might be, before we get here, there might be a 5.1, a 5.2, 5.3, etc., until it finally gets to here as that 5th step. And you can make that 4 if you think that's better, but this is actually a 5. And each one of these would be another mail transfer agent that's like, no, I'm not wales.org, but I know where it's at. No, I'm not the MX server for wales.org, but I know where it's at, and etc. until it actually gets here. That's why at the top of an email, you will frequently see what they call a send-receive stack of servers that have taken the email and then handed it off to another server, which took the email, processed it, and handed it off, etc., until it finally gets to the mail exchange for wales.org, and it will read that and go, oh, this is to Tristan, and it will finally deliver Isolde's love letter to Tristan@wales.org. And if he reads it and then wants to reply, he will recraft an email, and this will basically go backwards. It'll hit this mail server, it'll effectively be step 2, and so on, repeating until it gets back to Isolde, and they can exchange emails back and forth. That's the basics, a simplified view of how email actually moves. Now, on the threat intelligence side, we care about a couple parts of this. If this is us, this is the only zone of truth. The things that we know for sure as facts, this would be the zone of truth. Because we know our environment. We know that this is our MX server It has our SMTP software on it. We know it's valid. We know its IP address. We know what it's supposed to look like. So everything inside of here, inside of our corporate network, if you will, we know is legit. Everything out here could be completely spoofed. It could be completely wrong. And it's very common if someone's phishing or performing social engineering to do those things. They may add a series of send receives right here to falsify a trail to make you think it's authentic, it's genuine, that it's been checked for malware, whatever their particular focus is that day. You know, it could be not from Isolde, it could be from someone completely different. It's from so Morgan, who has a malicious poem that's going to infect poor Tristan at Wales.org, and so it could be completely wrong and be many bad things. So as a threat intelligence analyst, when we're looking at this, we would care about everything outside of it to evaluate whether it's true or not, and if true, go out and ascertain the state of these particular MTAs, maybe other elements of the system that actually process the email, to try to understand if more than one email came from there. For example, say we're chasing down a phishing campaign, or say we find that this is all false and we realize that this has actually been cut off of an otherwise legitimate email that was stolen. You know, those can be hints and signals towards activity that we could chase down to perform either attribution or to protect our enterprise at Wales.org here. And that would be a key part of something as threat intelligence would be interested in. And so we would look at what, I'm going to erase part of this and just write this out really simply. When we see emails, as a beginner part here, one thing that we're definitely interested in is the send receive chain, that back and forth between MTAs and what they said about the email. Of course, we care about the body and the context of the email, what's in it, how it's written, whether it's ASCII, you know, whether it has a, say, a base 64 blob that represents an image, or it has links, whatever it might be, anything in the body, and of course the signature is of interest. But when it comes to how email transits, this will be the number one thing that we would look at, and the security steps that it may or may not have gone through, because we're interested in that kind of information as email transits, especially as it's outside of our environment, and also most especially when it's inside our environment. Because again, we frequently deal with inside and outside intelligence. So just a short kind of how-to at a beginner level on how email moves, that's really geared towards someone that is an apprentice or very brand new in this industry. I'll continue to do more of these. I'll get my lighting problem fixed here soon, and hopefully not have this issue. But until then, I'll continue to make these. I've tried daytime and night, but neither one seems to work out well, so I guess I'll just get some lights or find a better place. If you do me a favor, if you like this, please like it. And if you really like what you're seeing, and there'll be more content, definitely, my initial plan is in a very short period of time, put at least 100 hours of content out there. I'm expecting to do 200 or 300 hours easily in the next few months. And if that's something you're interested in, please subscribe and follow us, and you can keep up with all the content as we create it. Otherwise, thank you, and I appreciate your time and hope to see you in a future lecture.